So I will characterize Desiree and Armand. I'll do Armand first. So we have Armand. He's our story's antagonist, characterized as cruel and selfish because he is putting the reputation of his household over his wife and infant son. Um, Basically their lives. Although Armand was living in the antebellum South, his hatefulness is amplified by the fact his father married his mother and lived in France to avoid persecution due to her ethnic background. I put this here because when you are characterizing characters and the setting is during antebellum or slave times of slavery, you have characters, and some literary analyzers will say, "Oh, they're not. You can't characterize them as racist because it's the time period." But Armand's father is a really good example how Armand was above and beyond the norm of racism. And you can also say the stance a character takes against racism in a story, no matter the time period, can be a useful tool in characterizing them, right? If they just sit back, you could say they're complacent, of weak character. It's a tricky one. But with Armand, cruel and selfish. We can also say, I want three character traits. We can say Armand can be characterized as impulsive and arrogant, um, because as soon as he sees Desiree, he must possess her as his wife, and that would be even though he is made aware of her obscure background. And that's important to note because he clearly said to her dad before they got married, I don't care about her background. I'll give her the oldest and proudest in Louisiana. So he obviously did care more than he said. So you can say, use that to characterize him as impulsive because he makes decisions without thinking of the consequences. Okay, then we have Desiree. Desiree, characterized directly as sweet and gentle. So I'll say Desiree is described, is characterized directly by the narrator as being sweet and gentle. And then we have, she can be characterized as naive and emotionally dependent. And I have Desiree's happiness is entirely dependent on Armand's mood. As Chopin writes, when he frowned, she trembled, but loved him. When he smiled, she asked for no greater blessing of God. And that might not be page 4. I'm going to have to double check that because I added the document after another story. Wait. So that was technically on page 2. That was page 2. Let me put that. Okay. And then this shows that Desiree is incapable of finding happiness within herself. She can be characterized. I feel bad characterizing her as weak because this is such a sad story, and her circumstances were like nothing that I would ever understand. You could say she can be characterized as innocent and a romantic because when her a hopeless romantic because when her dream of this family and life is shattered, it's too much for her to bear. She can be characterized as a hopeless romantic that only identified with being a mother and wife. And when that was taken from her, she cannot live. And will have a hopeless romantic who only identified with being a mother and a wife. And that is how we will you could also maybe characterize Desiree if you wanted to go negative. If you wanted to interpret this as team anti Desiree, you could say Desiree can also be characterized as materialistic and we'll say snobbish, materialistic and snobbish because she acquires a plethora of luxury garments while married to Armand. She also opts to have her enslaved nanny cut the fingernails of her son rather than herself toil. And that is insinuating that Desiree is lazy and materialistic. And because we have all these gowns, these silk gowns, and when we see her, she's sitting there being fanned. And when her mom says, notice it was not Desiree who cut her son's fingernails. Now, remember, when you're characterizing, you can be as judgmental as you want. It depends how you want to analyze a story. If you wanted to analyze a story and paint Desiree as the picture of the anti-feminist, and she's a weak-minded woman that can't stand up for herself or her son, and she's in the wrong here. You could say that, but that, or you could characterize this all on Armand, right? He's the enemy. He's the antagonist. He caused all this with his hateful racism. But you, like I said, literature can be analyzed in many different ways. So you could interpret Desiree as not a very good person, and you really can't interpret Armand. There's no way to interpret Armand as a good guy. Maybe a slight victim of his time period. But like I said, his dad, same time period, even before that, a generation before, and his dad was not swayed by the racist opinions of society. He went and he lived with his wife in France. So that would be characterization.